Have you ever left a conversation feeling defeated even after expressing all your thoughts? That constriction in your throat, like each word spoken, distanced you from your inner strength. Maybe you're often around individuals who dominate through loudness, interruptions, mockery, and a false sense of confidence. And perhaps you've been led to believe that silence signifies weakness, that withholding defense equates to giving up, that not reacting is the same as losing. But what if that belief is entirely misleading? What if real strength lies not in speaking, but in remaining silent? Have you ever mistaken silence for weakness? Comment 1. If you've ever felt pressured to defend yourself in arguments. Comment 2. If you've found power in holding back and saying nothing. Nietzsche, a deeply misunderstood philosopher, recognized a truth that few dare acknowledge. Excessive talking often exposes more than it should, and the compulsion to persuade places one at a disadvantage. Society conditions us to argue, justify, and defend our viewpoints as though every discussion is a struggle for truth. However, Nietzsche offered a different approach, one that is subtler, more incisive, and far more intelligent. Nietzsche believed silence isn't merely the lack of sound, it is a powerful presence. It unsettles others, throws them off balance, and compels them to face themselves. This message is for those who often feel overlooked, dismissed, or unheard. For those who walk away from dialogues, feeling their words were unnoticed. For the peacekeepers, the gentle souls who are tired of being taken for granted. Maybe you've mistaken silence for passivity, but today you'll learn that silence can be your greatest strength. True triumph doesn't come from defeating others in debate. It comes from not needing to debate at all. Prepare to redefine silence not as a lack of reply, but as the ultimate answer. Let's explore Nietzsche's philosophy and learn how to gain control in any situation without uttering a word. Why are we so compelled to reply, to argue, to correct, and to assert our correctness? At our core, we've been trained to think truth must be fiercely defended, and silence equates to conceding defeat. Nietzsche perceived this urge as a sign of deep inner weakness, specifically the fear of seeming weak. At the heart of this fear is the ego, delicate, insecure, and quick to misinterpret disagreement as aggression, turning every interaction into a contest. Nietzsche pointed out that most people don't argue to uncover truth. They argue to gain control. They argue to reinforce their beliefs, not out of certainty, but because if those beliefs were questioned, their entire worldview might collapse. In this context, arguing isn't an expression of wisdom. It's a protective shield, a desperate act by the ego to preserve its version of the story. So what does this imply? The moment you feel the urge to justify your stance, you've already stepped into their arena and lost. The very need to explain yourself reveals your dependence on being accepted, validated, or understood. Nietzsche referred to this mindset as herd morality, the behavior of people who live by others' standards and strive to be seen as righteous, proper, or virtuous. However, this craving for approval is what weakens you. Nietzsche argued that real strength doesn't come from persuading others, but from not needing their agreement at all. Strength lies in staying true to your beliefs despite mockery, critique, or dismissal. It means standing firm even when misunderstood. There are moments when silence itself becomes the shield that protects your beliefs against mockery or judgment. Comment 1 if you often hold firm to your views without explanation. Comment 2 if you find yourself struggling not to justify your stance. Nietzsche advocates for a kind of power that isn't gauged by spoken triumphs, but by inner discipline. It's a power rooted in the capacity to stay composed amid chaos, a strength that increases when you cease reacting. If your aim is true victory, this is essential to grasp. Debate is a stage play, and the one who reacts first has already been defeated. Nietzsche understood that a reactive mind is a mind under control, while the observing mind is the one to fear, because it transcends the need for validation. So if reaction weakens us, how do we assert influence? If speech can betray us, how do we convey strength without uttering a word? Nietzsche answered this through the concept of the Übermensch, a figure who rises above conventional morals and asserts dominance through complete self-mastery. In the next section, we will delve into the Übermensch and how this archetype uses silence as a calculated tool of power. Are you prepared? Because from now on, silence takes the lead. If this message resonates with you, consider subscribing to the channel. Your support is appreciated. Nietzsche's writings weren't intended for the faint-hearted. He addressed those rare individuals willing to examine themselves, face their inner suffering, and turn it into power. He believed the average person is bound by social norms, rigid morality, and the constant craving for approval. However, there is a different kind of individual, rare, formidable, and liberated. The Übermensch, or overman, doesn't react to the world. He molds it according to his own vision. Remarkably, he often accomplishes this transformation in total silence. The Übermensch doesn't concern himself with winning arguments or playing emotional games. He watches, comprehends. He speaks with intention, and more significantly, knows when to stay silent because he grasps what others overlook. Silence is its own kind of language, one that doesn't seek to persuade, but instead asserts authority. The Übermensch's silence isn't a void, it's a signal of danger, of dominance, and of complete self-possession. As others yell, he earns respect through a simple look. While they justify themselves, he silently observes and exposes their weaknesses with his composure. His silence acts like a barrier. Opponents left guessing grow anxious and err. They say too much. They become unsettled. His silence doesn't signal passiveness. It reflects disciplined control of his energy, a strategic reserve. The Übermensch understands that each word spoken is a move revealed, each emotional response, a vulnerability exposed. That's why he stays silent, not due to a lack of things to express, but because he has no need to express them. He has risen above the urge to prove himself. His mere presence communicates all that needs to be said. More than that, his silence is unsettling because it compels others to face their own inner chaos. In a world full of noise, those who can master silence hold the real power. Nietzsche envisioned the Übermensch as someone who forges his own principles, his own code, and moral compass, completely independent of others' approval. That's why such a person is feared, because nothing is more unsettling than someone immune to guilt, fear, or the desire for acceptance. His silence acts as a barrier against these manipulations. When he does speak, his words carry the power to shake empires. This brings up a vital question. Why is silence so disturbing to others? Why do people often feel threatened when someone chooses not to respond? What takes place in the human psyche when an anticipated clash is met with nothing but silence? The answer can be found in psychology, and that's what we'll investigate in the upcoming section. To truly grasp the force of silence, we must first examine the mental turmoil it stirs in others. And trust me, it's more profound than it appears. Silence isn't merely the lack of noise, it's a mirror. And what it shows people is often intolerable. By choosing not to respond, you're doing more than withholding speech. You're compelling the other person to listen to themselves, to face their own logic without the relief of opposition. And this is destabilizing because most people don't speak to communicate truthfully. They speak to shield themselves, reassure themselves, and cover the gap between their words and their true selves. When you stay silent, their mask begins to slip. Studies in social psychology show that in conflicts, silence is often interpreted as judgment. Even if you're merely listening, the speaker may feel vulnerable and uncertain. Why is that? Because without your reaction, they can no longer steer the conversation. They lose narrative control. This triggers an alert state in the brain, activating the amygdala, the part responsible for fear and anxiety. The other person begins to project their own anxieties onto you. Is he judging me? Did he see my insecurity? Does he realize I'm bluffing? In this psychological arena, silence functions like an unseen weapon. It strikes invisibly, yet its impact is felt by all. Nietzsche understood this truth long before psychology officially recognized it. To him, ordinary people exist as captives of their own reactions. They act impulsively, respond from vanity, and speak out of fear of being overlooked. The higher mind, however, the one who has self-mastery, stays silent, aware that each word surrendered is a weapon for the adversary. Every emotional response is an unintentional signal exposing where one can be struck. Beyond, this silence becomes destructive for manipulators. Those who feed on controlling others emotionally rely entirely on reactions to maintain their influence. When you refuse to respond, the cycle shatters, leaving the manipulator in panic. They crave your reaction to confirm their dominance. Without it, they unravel, exposing the vulnerabilities they had worked so hard to conceal. Yet silence reaches even deeper layers. It awakens unhealed wounds, rejections, abandonments, humiliations, because it forces the other person to face the fact that they are not central, that their words carry no weight, and that their presence makes little difference. For the narcissistic ego, this realization is unbearable. This is why remaining silent is not merely a defensive act. It strikes at the heart of illusion wounding, exactly where it hurts most. Silence demands inner strength. It unsettles not only others, but also yourself, since it contradicts everything ingrained in us. The urge to reply, to justify, to explain. Yet its very difficulty is what grants it power. It requires discipline, and discipline is genuine strength. Silence is often hardest to practice when emotions run high. Comment 1. if you've ever won an argument by staying quiet. Comment 2. If silence usually feels impossible when you're under pressure. Now, admit that you grasp how silence works within another's mind, stirring insecurity, dismantling defenses, and exposing facades. It is time to advance. You must shift from being a mere observer to one who applies this force deliberately and strategically. In the following section, you will learn precisely how to convert silence into a deliberate weapon, how to prevail in any dispute without uttering a word. Once mastered, this will render you immune to control. It is no longer enough to simply understand silence. You must begin applying it. For knowledge without application is lifeless theory. From this point onward, you will train to wield silence as a weapon of precision, not just as a shield, but as a finely honed blade that pierces through others' masks at the most unexpected moment. The first step, though simple, is ruthless. Stay silent when every part of you craves to reply. It demands strength, for everything inside you will push to justify, to defend, to prove your correctness. But that urge is toxic. Each time you yield to it, you expose that you remain under others' control, still invested in their opinions, still trapped in their game. Genuine silence begins only when that compulsion dies, when you realize you owe nothing to anyone and that truth exists without needing to be declared. The second tool of silence is observation. While others ramble, drown in explanations, and desperately attempt to cover emptiness with words, you remain attentive. You do not listen merely to await your chance to reply. You listen like a hunter, alert to the sound of prey in the forest. You catch the fears lurking between phrases, the contradictions that slip through the arrogance masking insecurity. You gather it all, so that when you finally speak, if you choose to, you do so with surgical precision, as one who completely understands the emotional landscape of the other. The third weapon is time. Learn to let silence stretch. The pause itself creates tension, and tension equals power. While the other keeps speaking, waiting anxiously for your reaction, which never comes, they begin to break down inside. Their discomfort intensifies. Their imagination fills the emptiness with doubts, fears, and paranoia. Even a single look from you, reinforced by silence, can strike harder than 10 carefully constructed sentences. The fourth weapon is unpredictability. Once you master silence, you become unreadable. And unpredictability always generates fear, for people cannot foresee your next move. When they lose that certainty, they surrender the advantage. They grow cautious, weighing every word carefully. You flip the dynamic of the interaction. From being reactive, you become the gravitational force that pulls the conversation. At this stage, silence no longer signifies absence, it embodies raw dominance. But caution is necessary. Silence must not be mistaken for passivity. Nietzsche never supported weakness. The silence described here is alive, deliberate, and infused with intent. It is not about withholding, but about preparation, selection, and positioning a form of strength that does not need to be flaunted to be unmistakably sensed. And when the right moment finally arrives after silence has already conveyed all it should, you may deliver a single sentence, a sharp remark, something that concludes the entire debate. Its impact will not stem from volume, but from truth depth and undeniable weight. Yet this leads to a more sensitive matter. Up until now, silence has been discussed as a tool to win. But sometimes the struggle is no longer about victory, it is about emotional survival. Certain situations go beyond arguments. People are not merely debating, but exploiting you, manipulating you, draining you. And without even noticing, you hand over your power daily. You are being subdued, even when no words are exchanged. This is where the journey reaches its darkest point, when silence ceases to be a strategy and instead becomes a muted cry of someone who has lost command over their own existence. In the next section, this truth will be unveiled, showing how you might be exploited without even recognizing it. For while you believe you are avoiding conflict, another may be constructing an empire upon your silence, something Nietzsche already foresaw. Is there anything more twisted than being forced into silence? It is the conditioning that convinces you silence is your sole choice, that repressing anger, yielding in arguments, and dodging conflict at all costs equals maturity, that holding your tongue is proof of balance. But what if I revealed this to be a trap? That often such silence is not true wisdom, but veiled submission. Nietzsche perceived this with ruthless clarity. What you label as peace is frequently nothing more than tamed surrender. Have you observed how certain people exploit your composure, your capacity to listen to ignore, to avoid conflict? They force their ideas, impose their authority, claim spaces that rightfully belong to you, and you permit it. You persuade yourself that engaging in battle is pointless, that preserving harmony is preferable, that the matter is insignificant. Yet the truth is undeniable. You are sacrificing dearly for this illusion of peace. And the most devastating part is this: you are being exploited by those who know with certainty that you will never resist. Nietzsche discussed the concept of slave morality, a value system devised by the weak as a means of enduring life under the dominance of the strong. This morality is rooted in submission guilt and superficial kindness. It acts as an invisible code that encourages self-denial, self-diminishment, and conformity, all while allowing one to believe such behavior is virtuous. Yet Nietzsche did not write for those who choose resignation. His words were intended for those who dare to shatter these chains, for those who recognize their exploitation and resolve to stop enabling their own subjugation. By embracing this internal silence, you unknowingly relinquish your power. You become molded by the expectations of others, ceasing to be yourself, and instead becoming what others require you to be. This state stands in direct opposition to Nietzsche's notion of the will to power. True will to power is not about shouting or controlling others. It is about mastering oneself. It means reclaiming your own narrative and embracing silence not out of fear, but from the recognition that you owe nothing to anyone. The silence of submission must be eradicated and replaced with the silence of presence. This silence does not yield, does not degrade, and does not apologize for existing. It is the silence that stands firm amidst chaos and without a word alters the course of events. This is the form of silence. Nietzsche would honor the silence of a person who has achieved mastery over themselves. But how can one ascend to this level? How can one shift from being manipulated to becoming the master of their own presence? How does one destroy herd morality within and be reborn as someone who radiates authority. Even in silence, the answer resides in Nietzsche's most powerful figure, the Übermensch. We have already discussed him. Now it is time to learn how to become one. In the final chapter, you will discover what it truly requires to embody this new kind of human. For the world does not need more talkers, it needs those who can command silence and rule through it. We have now arrived at the final point. It is crucial that you grasp this with absolute clarity. Silence is not absence, not emptiness, nor simply the gap between words. True silence is complete presence. It is mastery. It signifies that you are no longer reacting to the world, but instead shaping it through your very existence. Nietzsche never wrote for those satisfied merely with survival. His writings were for those who seek transcendence, for those willing to tear away the masks imposed by society, even if the act is painful. The silence of the Übermensch is not that of the oppressed or the coward. It is the silence of the warrior who has already triumphed before the battle has even begun. It is the calm of one who no longer feels compelled to prove anything to anyone, for he knows who he is, and more importantly, what he deserves. Now reflect on your own life. How often have you kept silent out of fear, guilt, or a desire not to cause disruption? How many times have you allowed others to decide for you to speak in your place, to trample on your truth enough? Nietzsche would argue that living in this manner is an affront to existence itself, that accepting such silence is an act of self-betrayal. From this moment forward, your silence must change its nature. It must cease being an escape, and instead become an invisible cry of authority, a boundary, an affirmation of who you are, even if no one else comprehends it. For who you are does not require understanding, it requires living. And living authentically demands courage. Do you possess that courage? Then declare it below. I choose the silence that commands respect. Not merely so. I know you've reached this point, but so you can make a public affirmation of this choice, this commitment to yourself. Because words hold power, even when they speak of silence. And do not stop here. The next video is crucial. It will build upon what you've learned and expand your thinking further. Watch it not for my sake, but because you deserve to transcend further. And remember, the weak cry out the strong, remain silent, and the wise choose the right moment. Now, it's your turn to reflect. How do you want to use silence in your life? Comment 1 if you will embrace silence as strength. Comment 2 if you're still learning to master it.